video. So if you have any interest in the Mohammedan religion, chances are you would have seen videos by Wahhabi Salafis, because they're the most prominent sorts of videos on YouTube. There's a lot of money behind this dawah business because they are funded by nation states such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar. In particular, they're funded by the Al Saud family. In other words, the family of Saud, they put in a lot of money because they have a kind of deal with the Wahhabi scholars in Saudi, because Abdul Wahhab put them in power because he went on a rampage around Saudi Arabia. A very nice friend from Saudi on Atheist Forums, I say friend but they're more of an acquaintance, but have a very harsh life in Saudi because they're a Quranist, and they've said publicly they've got multiple sclerosis, so they keep me humble because, yeah, I'm very grateful for what I have because I could have that kind of life. And they tell me that in all the madrasas they revere Abdul Wahhab because that's the kind of thing they do, even though this is supposed to be the land of Tawheed, the land of Mecca and Medina, and yet they got all this worship of Abdul Wahhab going on. Now the reason you don't hear about Abdul Wahhab so much outside of Saudi is because Salafism is like the internationalized version of Wahhabism. But there's the same thing really. There's no real difference, but I'm getting very sidetracked. But one last thing I'll mention is, yeah, this is life just a game trope. It's particularly touted by the Wahhabi Salafi crowd, these androids that follow these persons, because all they do is mutter tasbih all day long. They don't do anything else. They're rather robotic in that sense. It's hard to have a really decent conversation with these people, but maybe I'll be proven wrong in the comments. Maybe I'm on a reasonable, because for all the hate that Shias get, I've actually had nicer conversations with Shias, even though there's all this propaganda out there about Shias. Okay, so you would have probably seen these t-shirts, these Life Just Game t-shirts. Now, I mentioned just before about this, all these Wahhabi Salafis do is mutter tasbih all day long. Well, it's true, because if they actually thought about this is life just a game thing, then they would have probably come to the conclusion that non-religious people don't think life is a game, and according to the Quran, life may actually be a game, because if we investigate the components of games, then we see a lot of similarities of what the Quran says life is like, and they're going to delve into that now. So, what is a game? Okay, so there's lots of different types of games. Games have lots of different components depending on what type of game it is. So, what game are they talking about? Are we talking about board games, video games, sports? They're all examples of games, and there is some crossover between the categories. So, for example, chess boxing is a strategy game and a sport. So, when we actually see the different genres of games, we start to wonder, okay, because these Wahhabi Salafi people, these Saudi-funded personages, they never say, well, what kind of game life is, because I've watched the presentations that Hamza Sources gives, and he's quite adamant that life is not a game, and to understand why life is not a game, we have to understand the concept of the Mohammedan religion, and he's going to want to talk about Tawheed as soon as possible, because these people, I mean, at the risk of getting sidetracked, all this dawah stuff is like a pyramid scheme, because you do it to increase your reward, and then if you get that shahada, then you get a reward from another person and all their good deeds. So, because apparently doing the dawah is the greatest way of earning reward, even though you're going to Jannah, so you should have all the reward anyway, because you're good enough to go into Jannah. But okay, so you got this kind of pyramid scheme going on. So they ambush people out on the streets, so like desperate salesmen, and they'll try and get that shahada by hook or by crook. And this whole thing about earning reward, that is reminiscent of point scoring in games. And then the judging, I mean, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so this thing about judging, that's an aspect of some games as well. So, okay. Now, the non-religious people that they presumably are targeting, this life just a game thing, according to them, we're all stupid, and because we've got no objective morality, so it's all cats and dogs, it's all crazy. And Hamza uses this example of, okay, what if everyone is stuck in this room and they just have a few bits of bread and they're stuck in there for ages? How are we going to divide up the bread amongst the people? You've got no rules, so it's all going to be crazy. But the thing is, does the Quran have rules on dividing up bred between people. Last I checked, there's no fatwas on that. That's a very specific example. Too oddly, people would come together and agree on how to divide up the bread, and then obviously there'll be penalties for people who don't follow the rules. So that you don't need a 7th century book to work that out. And yeah, if people want to be douchebags, then yeah, they can starve. I'm sure the religionists watching this video would agree with that. And of course, they say, okay, because atheists, quote unquote, say that there's no objective morality, this leads to things like Hitler and Stalin and Mao. Okay, and that's a whole video for a separate time. I mean, loads of people have sort of done commentaries on this type of thinking, but I don't want to go into that here, because my focus in this video is about this is life as a game thing. So these religionists, these Wahhabi Salafis, they say you've got to follow the rules laid out in the Quran and the Sharia and the Sunnah, and if you don't, then you're going to go to the hellfire. So that's another similarity they have with the game, because games, yes, there is a risk of failure if you don't follow the rules, and you may even incur penalties if you do something wrong in the game. You might get kicked out of the game, for example, like you might get banned from competing again, like if you are this as a sportsman and then you do like doping or drugs. So that's another similarity that religion, well, in general, has with games. Because supposedly these non-religious people, they don't have rules and their life has no meaning, apparently. I think life is quite special. But anyway, I mentioned before, game can involve being judged. Now there's quite a variety of games that involve being judged. So, for example, in football, stroke soccer, you've got the referee and the linesman. And then in ice skating, synchronized swimming, diving, you've got judges there. When you think about it, a lot of games do have referees, but if we're just gonna referees, you could say, well, they're not really judges in the truest sense of the word. They're not handing out points, but they are handing out red and yellow cards. They're giving out penalties. But if we stick to actual judges that rate the players based on their technique, so if I just take synchronized swimming as an example, in that sport, or in other words, that game, if you touch the bottom of the pool, you get a penalty for that. And what you're trying to show is that you're really synchronized, hence the name of the game, and you want to have a really nice routine, saying you get the maximum points possible, and to get that really nice routine, you've got to train hard, you've got to understand all the different techniques, and you've got to be in sync with your team members, as I already mentioned. And the harder you train, the more likely you are to get the nice medal at the end. So you want to know that you did the best that you could. So then hopefully at the end you'll walk up to that podium and you'll get a nice shiny medal. So you're being deducted points for doing bad things, you're being rewarded points for doing good things, and this is kind of like this whole good deeds bad things, the whole scale of judgments thing. Now the scale of judgment, that goes back to, well, long before the Abrahamic religions. You had that in ancient Egypt, you had the feather being weighed against the heart. And then actually the first religion to really come up with the concept of heaven and hell, I believe, was Zoroastrianism. Zoroaster was this man who lived, around, there's, because of the Arab marauders, when they went into Persia, they sort of slaughtered everyone, and well, I don't want to go into that, the risk of derailing this video, but there's not many details about the life of Zoroaster, like when he lived, but we know that he lived at least around 1500 BC, if not earlier. So very old, and he was the first guy to come up with the concept of heaven and hell. And if we examine his life, there's a lot of parallels with the life of Muhammad, and his teachings, a lot of parallels with the Quran, and of course with Judaism as well, which is another religion that of course influenced the Quran. So this concept of judging, it's very old. It's not unique to the Abrahamic religions, and it's another aspect that games share with the religionist mindset. This idea of being judged. Okay, so skills and behavior tested. I've already touched on this, but you got those people that say that life is a test. Okay, kind of like how games are testing you. Games are at this temporary state, this miniature reality, and you're pushing your skills to the limit, and you want to do the best that you can do. Kind of like how these Wahhabi Salafis say, okay, to be the best person you can be, you've got to follow the Quran and Sunnah and read the Hadith. Although, maybe they don't want you to read the Hadith because there's loads of inconvenient passages in there. But yeah, there's lots of inconvenient stuff in the Quran as well. But obviously, they want you to read it in Arabic, so you don't really understand it. They're kind of like how the Roman Catholics, they used to only print the Bibles in Latin, and then the layman couldn't really understand the Bible. Well, in fact, those people were illiterate back then, but in the Roman Catholics, it really went out of the way to kind of deny people a version of the Bible that they could read. Then again, you could argue, well, this was before the printing press, but then this all led up to the Protestant Reformation. So, okay, I've already mentioned miniature reality assimilation. So, kind of like how people say, well, life is just a temporary state before you go into Jannah. Okay, a game is like a temporary state, and in that temporary state, you're trying to earn the best reward possible. So I mainly be talking about in terms of sports, but other games, for example, chess, you're testing your mental ability instead. You've got to be several turns ahead of your opponent if you want to win, and you've really got to sit there and really think about what your opponent's trying to do if you want to win the game. So, yeah, the games, and they test both physical agility and mental agility. And within that, there's a wide variety of different things that you can sort of test for. Point scoring, okay, I've already touched on this, but many games include a way of keeping track of the score. So this is like you have Tawab. Allah keeps track of the Tawab. It's like a tally that you have at the end of your life, and this is the amount of reward that you get. So when you go into Jannah. So after the Day of Judgment, all your good deeds are tallied against your bad deeds, and hopefully you will go into the hellfire. So this is kind of like, if you do particularly badly in a game, then you might get a penalty, or you might get banned from the game. So some people, or some athletes, they do so badly at the game that they compete in that they get banned for life, and they're never allowed to compete in that game again. That's kind of like the equivalent of, I suppose, going to hellfire, because, you know, hellfire, that's where you go if you failed at this temporary state, which is life. So, okay, yes, the Day of Judgment is like the end of the game, in other words. Because we have examined, leading up to this, several different ways that life is a game. I mean, given what we've already spoken about, or what I've spoken about rather, it would kind of make sense that Day of Judgment is like the end of the game. And the conclusion is, okay, games are temporary state like life, you follow a set of rules, and just testing your behaviour. And then you've got the Tawab, which is like the score in a game. And obviously, score can be added and deducted, and then a lot of games even include judging. So it's looking like, according to the Quran, life is a game, and it's not like these non-religious people who think life is a game, because according to us, or your impression of us, is that life has no rules, life has no meaning, there's no goal, and because we're not following any rules, we can't reach the ultimate goal, or rather, we're not following your set of rules. So, in light of that, I would say that it's not me who thinks life is a game. It's actually the Quran, given these 5 different things that would suggest that life is a game according to the Quran. Now, obviously, there might be some dispute. Well, there will be some dispute in the comments section. I know that when Essence of Thought does reply to Hamza, is always like, oh well, you should have contacted me to clarify things. And basically what he's saying is I didn't include all the information that I wanted to in the video, so it's kind of doing a disservice to his viewers by saying that, like, okay, there was information missing in the video, so you should have contacted me to kind of clarify this. But these are all these life is just to gain things. These are things that have been repeated over a number of years that people haven't really thought about, because all they do is do tasbih all day long, because that's what Wahhabi Salafis do. And just on this idea of, okay, the Quran is supposed to make you a better human being. With the death of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, the Wahhabi Salafis are kind of jumping on that, even though he was a Sufi, so that makes them hypocrites, because they're kind of programmed from birth to hate Sufis, because their dhikr involves dancing, you know, the Sufi wording and their traditional musical instruments, and a lot of them, not all of them, they smoke hashish. So they do all these haram things, and yet suddenly they thought, oh, okay, we can take advantage of the death of Muhammad Ali for our own ends. Suddenly Sufis aren't so bad. Because there's a nice interview on Press TV with Yasser Qadhi where he talks about Sunni Shia divide and how there is all this Sufi and Shia hatred, especially in Mecca in the bookstores. It's a very interesting interview. But then people are like, why is this Yasser Qadhi guy on this Rafida TV dissing the land of Tawheed? And funny how Hamza Thoughts has been on Press TV, and none of these people care, but because it's Yasser Qadhi, he's not radical enough. He's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say renounce Wahhabi Salafism, but he's slowly been distancing himself from these people. And I remember he's even got death threats from household henchmen in Iraq and Syria, so that's very interesting. But back to the point of this. You were saying the Quran made Muhammad Ali a better person. But, well, first of all, that's very subjective, and second of all, how do we judge whether he was objectively a better person? Because being a better person, that means different things to different people, and you have all these people that say, oh yeah, the Bible may be a better person, or Buddha, the teachings of Buddha may be a better person, or the Bhagavad Gita. So I just think people have all they're really looking for when they watch these videos is just reinforce their confirmation bias, and they're like looking for that Iman booster, because there's all these corrupting influences around. So they say that when someone leaves, okay, the Mohammedan religion doesn't need you, but they're obviously obsessed with, again, as many as possible, watching all the Shard videos. So obviously they do think that the Mohammedan religion needs people, because in a lot of countries they are a minority, especially in the West. So they think, okay, if we can get as many Shahada as possible, then eventually we'll become the majority, and then we can impose Sharia on everyone. So it's all a numbers game to them, and for them to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, we don't need you," that's, I think, very disingenuous. Yeah, and I seem to have got very sidetracked. So yes, the conclusion is Mohammedans think life is a game, because we saw those 5 things, and Quran 2330 elaborates on this. And if you want to have further discussion about this, you can find me on atheistforums.org, where you can also find my Saudi acquaintance. He was actually quite a polarizing figure there, but I think he's quite nice. And Quran 16:125 says that yes, you should come down to atheistforums.org and engage with us. So some of the members, yeah, they're more palatable than others. I'm sure you have a nice time. Because you have a few members from the Ummah who stuck around. So thank you for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.